It had a picture of President Roosevelt on the nose and was called the Big Yank. The main things that we bombed was marshalling yards, which is railroad yards, German airfields, and primarily oil refineries. If we would knock out their oil refineries, they couldn't get fuel and oil to combat against our troops. So we felt pretty good about knocking those things out. I had flown for 5 missions. My 5th mission was the only time we tangled with fighters.
There's 4 of them, 1 o'clock high.
That morning, they didn't have enough room on the walls. They painted on the ceiling, target for today, Berlin. We got down there in a truck. I saw the engineering officer that was in charge of the Big Yank. I said, Sergeant, you'd better take a good look at this airplane. Well, what, Lieutenant? You may not see it coming back. Well, what do you mean? I said, we're up to bomb Berlin. He said, you know, Lieutenant, if it may make you feel any better, I found a brand new penny this morning. I'll give it to you for luck. I said, Sergeant, I'll take anything you got for luck, because I know it was going to be a pretty rough one. From Steperone, Italy, it was a 7-hour mission. No flak on that mission. Fighters only. If you're going to hit with fighters, the enemy didn't throw flak up because they were afraid of shooting down their own airplanes. But fighters, we had all the fighters we wanted to see. And I saw my engineer get this one. He looked at this German pilot, looked at me, and I looked at him. We both had oxygen masks. And he went shooting by, and my engineer had these 250 calibers, and I can see him right down the fuselage. Thank God it was all come back. Then you went to report to your squadron commander, and he had a 5th of Schindler's on his desk, and everybody had to take a little shot. And then you'd go get a cup of coffee. That was the best part of it all.
We was on our 26th mission, the day we shut down. That day, they just had us targeted, that's all, and we lost half our squadron that day. They were tracking us, back of us. The tail gunner could see them. It took both of us to keep control of the plane. I'm calling Mayday.
Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Thompson 2530.
3 was the oil just poured out of it like mad. There wasn't anything I could do. We just couldn't hold her in the air any longer. We decided that was it, was going to go, and Puckett says, everybody get the hell out of here. I landed in trees, and when I stopped, I could just touch the ground with my toes. Now that's how lucky I was when I bailed out. Yeah. And I unbuckled my suit, stepped out, and walked off and left it. I was trying to go west to the river. Nazi youth organization found me. They took me to a little town called Altenkirchen, interrogation center. Then they put us on a train and took us clear across Germany up to Stalag-Luft, the POW camp. We had a radio. Put it together every night. We got messages from England every day. We were told by headquarters to stay put. We were close and there wasn't any use of taking a chance. After we got free, we got loose, and hell, the people were just running everywhere. And in fact, the 8th Air Force flew in and picked us up, and my old squadron picked us up, and the old crew chief of our plane was there. You know, and he was worried about what happened to the plane and all that sort of thing. It was like an old homecoming reunion for a while. They put us on B-17s and took us back into Camp Lucky Strike in Paris.
On the very first mission that we flew, I mean, I was 20 years old. At that time I was flying co-pilot. I was the youngest person on the crew by far. In the briefing that day, they said we were going to, instead of bombs, we were hauling tinfoil. Now, the reason we were hauling tinfoil, the idea was they hoped that you could drop this tinfoil and it would jam the German radar. Co-pilot's job at that time is to, call out your airspeed and your flaps and all that. The pilot would usually fly up to a certain altitude, and you'd put on your oxygen mask about 10,000, 12,000 feet. If you have oxygen, you can breathe and think. Otherwise, you don't. Jack Thrasher, he was leading us. We were flying on his right, and another airplane flying on his left. All of a sudden, what I remember is the aircraft is starting to vibrate. And so I looked at the instruments, and hell, the engines are, hell, they're fine. There's not a damn thing wrong with them. Well, just about that time, I saw an enemy 262 go over our right wing, one under the right wing, one under our left wing. And boom, I see this Jack Thrasher is blown out of the air. See, the Germans had the first jet aircraft. We knew that they existed. Their speed was just something else. So we were jumped by these Me-262s. So that was my initiation to see, I found out what combat was like real early.
The squadron bombardier went down, so they asked me to fly deputy lead as a bombardier. The lead bombardier for the group would be the first man over the target. So bombardiers had a hell of a high mortality rate, of course, because gunners would aim at that first ship. In the formation, there were usually 7 or 9 ships, depending on how many aircraft could be put up, and there would be 4 squadrons to the group. It was a coordinated affair between the bombardier.
Bombardier, this is radar operator, over.
This is Bombardier, go ahead.
And the radar navigator would correct for azimuth and course as well as rate. And he had a chart overhead watching the circular scope. Meanwhile, the bombardier would be setting his index to just what the radar operator is calling. And the index of the ground speed was marching up toward what he had set.
Roger. Bombardier, open bomb bay doors after turn.
So when the 2 indices would meet, the bomb trigger having been set would automatically drop the bomb. Everyone would synchronize for rate, but the lead bombardier would synchronize for both rate and azimuth. And everyone in that squadron would be instructed to drop when they saw the bombs drop from the lead bombardier. Fighters do not like to enter the bomb run where the flak is extremely heavy. You would see the wall of flak up there, so you just give a prayer and go after it. I got so I would even head into the flak because you knew that's where the target was going. You just had to hope that it wasn't your turn.
And they put us on an Italian boat and took me over to Sardinia. They took me down to a station there and assigned me the 439th Squadron. My pilot and co-pilot and other crew was already there. So they'd saved the cot for me, so I had a place to sleep. Sent me on a navigation mission, just practice, to Sicily. And I made it back good, so they said, "You're going to be a navigator here. You're not going to do any bombing." I said, "Okay." So from then on, I was a navigator. I always flew in a lead plane. My 10th mission, I led the group. 54 airplanes way up in northern Italy. Well, going up along Sardinia, we were starting to drift off. The colonel called me up and said, "Dwain, I think wind's changed." I said, "I know it. I found that out." I said, "We're going to turn." So we're supposed to be at the tip of Corsica at 4 o'clock. I said, "We'll be there." So I turned them. 4 o'clock, we got the tip of Corsica. There was the fighters waiting for us to go up, clear up in northern Italy to an airfield. Well, then I flew all them missions. Then we moved up to Corsica. CO come out and said, "Boys, shut it off." They signed a peace treaty. No more war. We just got out of the airplane and went back to our tent. Said, "Well, we don't have to fly anymore. We're done." No celebration. I guess they had celebration before the United States, but we didn't. No. So we played ball for two months or more before we got to come home. That's what we did, played ball.
Our mission was high altitude escort and going with the B-17s to protect them. P-47 were loaded with 50 caliber, 4 on each wing, and that was a challenge with the P-47 because it was a little bit limited in range. We had to carry awfully big external tanks. We'd stay with the bombers, hopefully all the way to the target. They got hit.
This is Red Leader. All right, men on the ball. This
Usually we had to drop the tanks. We had to get the job done fast and get out of there because it's a long ways from Duxford to Berlin. And I always felt badly having to break off with them when we'd run low on fuel because they had to go in pretty much naked into the targets. Flak suppression was one of our missions. We'd go in ahead of them and soften up the area by taking out the flak positions. But that 88 millimeter is a very effective anti-aircraft weapon. You don't know where they are until they shoot at you. The game is on, you know, you're there and you better be accurate because they could turn the sky black at any time. Later on in the year came the transfer to 51s because the F-51 did in fact have longer range. Well, you know, the 51 was an entirely different machine. It was a good airplane, no doubt about it. And air to air, it was a marvelous airplane. But it would not stand the abuse, the flak. It wouldn't stand the combat attrition that the P-47 would. But then came the jet age. The Germans were pretty clever. They started running jets through the bomber streams. And that was a whole new ballgame because by the time you saw or the engagement occurred, it didn't take long for them to evaporate. That was a whole new tactical problem.
I was the aerial engineer on a B-17 and top turret gunner. I've been trained in mechanics on the operation of different parts of the plane. I always stood right behind the pilot and co-pilot as we took off. I always called out the airspeed, our manifold pressure, and how our engines were operating, so he knew what exactly he was getting, how much power he was pulling, and in case of emergency, I always make the adjustments on the engines.
Got an engine on fire.
Top turret was the two guns manning a plexiglass turret on the top right behind the pilot and the co-pilot. That meant I stood in this top turret. Space between the back of my turret and my gun sight, it was very tight. I flew 35 combat missions over Germany. So one of the most memorable ones was the mission we flew on December 24th to Germany. We'd been down for about 8 days. The Battle of the Bulge had started. We led the 8th Air Force in, our group did. There was 4 squadrons of 13. We was led by General Castle. We just had got into Germany, and we were attacked by about between 35 and 40 German fighter planes. In the ensuing battle, we lost about 13 aircraft out of the 39 of us. General Castle's plane was shot down, and he was the only general of the 8th Air Force that was killed in combat.
B-17 out of control at 3 o'clock.
I'd say our crew was more like a family. Anything we did together. Our pilot was quite a bit older than we are. We always called him Pop. I was just 19, but most of us were younger. Still, those are some of the closest friends I have.
I was a radio operator and handled the waist guns. That was my position. First thing we had to learn was the Morse code. We had the tent set up with tables, and when you learned it, then you could tune in some station somewhere and try to copy it. And then we learned the operation of the equipment, how to tune the sets, and simple maintenance. I flew with the squadron commander the last several months I was overseas, so we led quite a few of the group missions. And when you're leading a group mission, you're the only one that has any radio contact. Everybody monitors your radio, but I'm the only one, if I'm in the lead ship, that sends back a signal. Everything was encoded. The lead crew radio operator would get a book with the code books and things in it, so you could make up a simple message like encode bombs away and the time and anything else that might be pertinent.
Bombs away on primary at 1142 hours.
In a B-17, the radio operator compartment had twin 50s, which you could swing out, open the window, swing out, and put it in positions. And the only thing is, you got to be real careful because you could shoot your stabilizer off. You could do that. So, all the missions I flew in B-17s were night bombing missions. You're bombing a runway areas or shipping, you can see the outline. They get you in their searchlights and blind you. And the plane is illuminated inside like daylight. And it's quite an experience to be in a dark, B-17 and they have a searchlight come on, you swear to God that so they see you personally because you back away from the window with fright from it.
My job was the waist gunner, taking care of the middle of the plane. If you were going on a mission, the first thing we would do, they'd get us up about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, fellas, roll out. We have a mission this morning.
After you dressed, you would keep to the mess hall and eat there. Then you'd get in the truck and you'd go to your headquarters, and then they would give you the breakdown.
Target for the day is ankle.
And then you'd eat breakfast again. Then you'd go out and get on the plane, and you'd fly for 12 to 14 hours. Well, our formation would be 36 planes. We would not only have our group, but there'd be other groups, could be anywhere from 200 to 1,000 planes up there. You couldn't see them all because they'd just be scattered out. They'd be scattered for 5 miles. In addition to the regular flight gear, we also had electric suits that we wore, even long underwear. It would keep us warm. We also wore our wool dress clothes. You weren't sitting, you were looking all the time. We were looking all around on both sides of the plane. We was looking at anything that was German, but vigilant all the time.
Just knocked down another one. Scratch 1 ME-109.
The P-51s with the red tails come out, and they'd come along beside us, and then they would do a wing waver at us, you know, and we'd wave back at them. All the gunners were automatically buck sergeants. And the reason of that being is that if it went down or you bailed out, the German Air Force would treat you as an airman if you were a sergeant. But if you were a corporal, you'd go to prison.
When I got assigned to this, first sergeant told me, "You're going to be in the Cheyenne." And I said, "Cheyenne what?" He said, "You're going to be in the Cheyenne turret." That's a tail gunner turret that's been changed with a bigger aperture area with twin 50s. The first mission I made was because a guy didn't feel good. I was more scared when we took off than any time in the whole flight, though. You ain't in a pressurized aircraft. I'm up above, behind the bomb bay, above where my turret is. It's going like this and going like that, and when he's just above the ground, he's bringing the wheels up in the front, and it sounds like coming apart. Your suit was a sheepskin suit, leather. You had mittens with a trigger finger in them, and you had gauntlets clear up, and then you had earphone, and you had your helmet was leather with sheepskin, and I'd go back to one of the spar sections and hang on and sit on my duffer in my suit. Then the aircraft commander would say, "Get into your gun stations." You're like on an ironing board and at 2 different levels. Your ammo is fed into your guns by a tray, and then your spent rounds go into an asbestos apron. Your intercom system within the bomber itself was always active once you formed up.
There's Charlie doing his twirl again.
One gun station will tell the other gun station on the intercom, "Charlie's coming your way."
Enemy fighters at 7 o'clock high.
When you're in the sky, you have nothing to measure by. You don't know till you see your field of fire go out there. My 250s merge at 150 yards. In the tail gun section, the world's already gone by before you see it. You're looking at the back end of it.
I was in college at Ames when I got the draft notice, so I went down to Camp Dodge for the physical. I was supposed to go to aircraft mechanics school. I was slated to do that at Amarillo, but they had the Air Force had a shortage of gunners. The turret is a complete ball. It's 42 inches in diameter. You got in the ball after you took off, and so you point the gun straight down. That puts the door up inside the airplane. You climb in, and your hands operated the turret. And you're inside the ball, and you have your 250 caliber machine guns, and your oxygen equipment, and around 500 rounds of ammunition. The motor and everything else that runs it's in there, so there's not much room. The first 5 or 6 missions, You're scared, and then you start getting tired, and you get so tired you begin to think you don't think you're going to make it. And then the last 5, you think, well, maybe you are going to make it, and you get more scared again. The railroad yards, aircraft factories, synthetic fuel plants, and those were critical targets. Those were generally most heavily defended. My last mission was to Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, Skoda Munition Company. They'd warned the Czechs by radio to not work in the factory that day. The Germans have the radios too, you know, so they just rolled in all the flak guns on railroad cars before we got there, so we had extra flak that day. The last combat mission they flew was April 25th, 1945. That was my 35th one.
Went overseas as a staff sergeant, and I was an assistant crew chief. I related well to Master Sergeant Virgil Fuller from Texas. I remember he told me, Zach, as my assistant crew chief, I want you to run the ship. Hydraulics, the fuselage, airframes, the engines, and so forth. And someday, if you should become crew chief, you'll have that confidence already established. And as it turned out, he became ill and was sent back to the States, and I had to assume the responsibility. The Bonnie B, yeah, that was my fortress. This is the way the Bonnie B got its name. His baby girl was born, Bonnie Beck, B-E-C-H. And he asked me if he could name the ship after her, and I said, sure. A lot of the fellas like this nose art, as they call it, with the curvaceous American girls. But this was just Bonnie-B, B for Beck. It was strictly business. They came out, they got loaded up. It was pre-flighted. When it was time to take off, we would guide them out because we had to be careful that they would get off the concrete pad in case it was muddy or something like that. It would be very difficult to extricate a fortress when one of the wheels is stuck in the mud. But each ground crew had their own tent on the flight line. We had a couple of bunks in there, a little stove for heat. Then there was a concern, how many ships did we lose? Was my ship okay? Was anybody injured on board the aircraft? They would shoot a flare to signify that we got somebody injured. My ship flew 93 successful missions. In fact, we lost her after we were already penetrating into Germany. I understand scavengers stripped it for parts and for souvenirs.